the evolution of the duty of care, starting in the UK and then coming to Canada. I'm taking note of the development that courts have been concerned about a wide scope for the duty of care. Concern centering around, if the scope is too wide, you have more tort litigation and it's harder to control and so on. So we saw this in the UK, the abandonment of a couple of tests, and in Canada, the retention of one of the more recent tests in the UK, but then sort of a modification, so that now the language we use for negligence and duty of care is whether or not we're applying the Aug7 or the Aug7 tests. The Aug7 being applied for a situation where we have an established duty of care, or, as we'll find, in certain areas of negligence, there are specific duties of care that we look to. But the core tends to be some sort of variation around the Aug7 test. And the second test we use is the Aug-Cooper, which is applied in a particular situation, that being when a novel duty of care is being sought by the plaintiff. And as we talked about, the difference between the Aug-7 and Aug-Cooper is that there's an extra layer of policy consideration in the Aug-Cooper test. And that extra layer, or the two layers involved at the 1B stage. So we have 1A in Aug-Cooper, reasonable foreseeability that the defendant's negligence or carelessness would lead to harm to the plaintiff. Then we look at proximity, which was there proximity between the parties, but that also includes a policy consideration regarding the types of parties we are looking at. And what's meant by the types of parties is referring to an example I used yesterday, police and a victim of crime. And the question at the first policy stage with proximity is, should the court recognize a duty of care in this particular situation, in this relationship, the police and a victim of crime? And if that's satisfied, we would go to the second policy analysis that's more open-ended, more broad, which generally looks at, are there reasons that the court should not recognize a duty of care in this circumstance? And those would be beyond the first layer of policy analysis. If we look at what that means, I would say that it means that a plaintiff has a tough job. Whether it's the Aug-Kamloops or Aug-Cooper test, the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. And again, it's worth reminding you, duty of care is just one of 4 elements to establish a negligence claim. It's the most important, but it's one of 4. So there are a number of hurdles to get over in a negligence claim. And when you look at the novel duty of care, it's a bit harder because there are these 2 layers of policy analysis or policy consideration, which gives the court scope to reject the plaintiff's call to recognize a duty of care in a particular situation. And that's a fairly powerful power that the court has, that's somewhat, you might say, institutionalized if we look at the common law test being an institution in itself. So there is a tough job ahead for any plaintiff. That's not to say it's easy for a defendant. And as I said yesterday, at each stage of the analysis, a defendant will present arguments. That's not because there's a reversal of the burden of proof or anything like that. It's because of a concept called an adverse inference. And I'll compare it with criminal law. In criminal law, an accused does not need to do anything. An accused may decide that they will not present any evidence or anything whatsoever as a defense, because the burden of proof is on the Crown, and that burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof is different in civil, what we call civil or private law courts. It's on a balance of probability, so something like a 51%, we might think of it that way. But an adverse inference means that a court can draw an assumption if a defendant doesn't present an alternative or some sort of argument to say, to push back against the plaintiff's assertion. So don't mix up the burden of proof with what is almost an obligation by a defendant. A defendant shouldn't leave anything open for the plaintiff. So I think if some of you, I think, are involved in firms that do tort litigation or personal injury, which I think is very difficult as a practice area, not just because of the law, but the way the market works. You don't get paid until you win. You know, there are lots of firms that advertise, we don't get paid until you do. It's a tough living if all of your clients aren't paying and you're hoping for a payout at some point. So this is what we're looking at with tort litigation. It's a tough area for plaintiffs. And we're going to go through some of the key aspects of the duty of care today. So we'll start with duties of affirmative action.
So, I have a question. I just want to, get this clear. You said when it's an established duty of care, what test?
And Kamloops.
Okay.
So duty of affirmative action. I think in a non-legal sense, you might have heard this phrase, affirmative action, in a very different context. And that would be something like equal opportunity hiring. That's not what we're looking at here. The duty of affirmative action is a concept that we look at as to whether or not somebody is obliged to act in particular circumstances. So the classic example really is a rescue case. You are walking along the waterfront and you see somebody drowning. Are you obliged to rescue them? And the common law says no. Because there is no positive duty, positive meaning a duty to act. There's no duty to act for anyone, a random person in the public. If you're a doctor, then there will probably be a duty to act for somebody in, broadly speaking, the healthcare industry. But generally speaking, the common law doesn't have a duty of affirmative action. And that's what we'll start with. So if we look at, I think a useful way to guide the discussion is the child's case, the excerpt that I've given you, and particularly the quotation where Chief Justice McLaughlin writes, "The law permits third parties witnessing risk to decide not to become rescuers or otherwise intervene. It is only when these third parties have a special relationship to the person in danger or a material role in the creation or management of the risk that the law may impinge on autonomy." So the idea here was we have as a principle enunciated by McLaughlin is what I just talked about. There's no obligation, generally speaking, on anyone to help somebody in distress. There will be particular circumstances that arise, and again I'm referring to this quotation, where there's a special relationship between the person who sees the person in distress and the person in distress. Or the person who sees the other in distress has had some role in that person being in danger or in need of rescue. Then there can be an obligation or a duty of affirmative action. So to kind of crystallize the point, a lot of textbooks refer to this American case called Osterland, where, kind of crudely put, the defendant rents out canoes to people. Yeah.
Question. So in terms of like special relationship, what is the measure for how can we know if the relationship
we'll get to that.
to what extent?
Oh, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Let me do the cases in that. So in Osterland, we have this guy that rents out canoes, and he seems to be kind of an indifferent person, because he rents out this canoe to two guys who are obviously drunk, and about a half hour later, he hears them crying for help and says, "Not my problem." Now we can think, well, you gave them, or you rented the canoe to them. Don't you have an obligation? And tort in common law says no. That he didn't, if we think about some of the distinctions we talked about yesterday with Rankin's garage, he didn't tell the people to go do this, he didn't force them, he didn't have an obligation to prevent them, is what the court is saying. So therefore there is no duty on him. I think the case actually talks about there is no duty of him to even get up out of his deck chair. So in that, I think what I found is for a civil law audience, that seems rather callous. That there's no legal obligation. Oh, callous, mean-spirited, indifferent, evil. It seems odd that he wouldn't have an obligation to do something. But entrenched in the common law is this idea that you don't have to do anything. As I read in the quotation, this was 2006 from Childs, McLaughlin saying, the person who hears the calls for rescue has a decision to make, but they are not obliged to do anything unless certain parameters are met.
To me, this situation where he rented out the canoe, and so it was a commercial transaction, I think it's pretty similar to a commercial bar serving alcohol and then being liable for people who drunk drive.
Yeah, but we'll see some nuances to that as we go through the cases. So a theme that I think you can pick up on, especially if you've read ahead with the cases, is in tort law, earning money is seen as kind of dirty. When there's a commercial transaction, you have more obligations. Osterland doesn't show that, but remember that's an American case, and I use it more to illustrate the point. But generally speaking, in tort, in the common law, it was seen as a bit grubby. I think I mentioned to you about barristers' robes before, right? So when you get called to the bar, you get your robes and there's this little pocket in the back. And that comes from history, where way back when, I don't know exactly why, but barristers, lawyers were supposed to just do things kind of like Sherlock Holmes. You know, I just love solving crimes. You don't need to pay me. So clients would have to sneak up behind barristers and put money in this pocket to pay them. Now, I question the whole altruism, because if you take the time for your tailor to sew a pocket in your robes for this purpose, I'm not sure if you're all that altruistic. You know, if I wore a big bucket around my neck that said, please feel free to give me tips, I don't know if that's necessarily benevolent in this situation. But anyway, I use that as an example that making money was seen as kind of dirty. I mean, you can see that in lots of literature as well. So if we look at the Ontario cases, starting with Matthews and McLaren. Sorry,
I wanted to ask a question here, because how is this different from community care? Like in here, I can see forcibility, there is proximity, and then also like policy reasons will say that the renter who clearly saw that these people, they were intoxicated, will have a duty of care now. But the duty of positive action says no duty of care, so I don't understand.
So if we take intoxication out, because if you read ahead, you'll see the cases do put an onus on a commercial entity, as was said, when there's alcohol and money being exchanged. But generally speaking, the proposition is, remember with contract, you voluntarily enter into an obligation. The idea with tort is that you can't have an obligation imposed on you. You must have done something to warrant that. And here in Oosterland, generally the court is saying, well, he didn't do anything to these people. Now we see, sort of with a revisionist looking back to 1928, was it North Carolina? Massachusetts. Looking back to 1920 Massachusetts, we can say, well, you know, shouldn't there have been something there? Didn't he have a hand in it? But at the time, the court is saying, no, the owner, Hill, did not do anything to these people.
Well, nowadays everything operates by a waiver. By a waiver.
Yeah.
You sign a release and then go bring.
Well, and then the question, as we saw with contract, is whether or not that's effective. It depends on how well you draft your waiver.
Usually they hold it up.
Depends on what happens. I'd say.
Isn't it the same idea like in court? You are adults, you are making your decision, you make your contract, and if it's not a good deal, it's not a good deal. So here it's the same thing. If you are drunk and you don't mind to rent a canoe when you are drunk, it's your business.
Yeah, it's sort of
I'm not supposed to be more clever than you.
Yeah. So there's sort of, if we look at the common law, my understanding compared to lots of civil law jurisdictions is it's a bit more commercially oriented. And I think Oosterland underscores that point. So looking at Matthews and McLaren, what's happening in this case? Now, keep in mind, Matthews and McLaren comes up twice, so to speak. We look at it from two different plaintiffs' perspectives. So we're talking about one of the plaintiffs here, Matthews.
So they're on this boat in the lake, and there are two friends. One falls out into the water, and the other friend tries to get him.
Yeah. dives in after him.
after him. And so the first guy died of shock, but they're bringing a claim against the captain to say he should have acted,
Yeah.
should have actually turned the boat around to go and rescue the guy that fell in.
So to be clear, we're looking only at that first victim, not the one that came in after him. That case we look at later, it's called Forsley. Matthews is the first person that goes in the water. Just to add a further detail, at this time of year, Lake Ontario is supposed to be very frigid. So when
Yeah.
Yannick said he died of shock, the shock is precipitated by how cold the water is.
I felt it was like fright.
Sorry?
I felt the shock was like fright. Like,
No, it was supposed to be shock because of the cold. Not like frightened, I guess I haven't gone through the experience, so I can't articulate it clearly. But I think the idea is that there's a sudden shock to the system that kills it.
like hypothermia.
Yeah. So, in Matthews, the family is suing and saying, as Yannick said, the ship's captain should have done more. Now, what did the ship's captain do? It wasn't like he just looked at the guy and said, wow, that happened. He did something. What did he do?
He drove the boat back.
He backed up.
He drove his boat
Yeah.
back,
Yep,
trying to rescue him.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he does attempt something. It's not like he has let the guy fall overboard and said, well, I gotta make good time, so I gotta keep going. He does make an effort. So we have three main points that come out of this. That generally speaking, there's no duty to come to the rescue of a person who finds himself in peril. Second, that there's strong support for a duty of affirmative care in special relations or certain circumstances. One of which is if a defendant affirmatively undertakes the rescue operation, by law that person is seen as assuming a duty to act and will therefore be liable. So there are two things here that apply to the captain. 2 points. One is that second point that I read out, that there's a special relationship. He is the ship's captain and a passenger fell overboard. So there would be an obligation for him to rescue. Second is the allegation that somehow the captain caused Matthews to fall out of the boat. That would be the third point, not the third point. Somehow he caused this to happen, let's say. But once he turns around, and I'm talking about the third point now, once he affirmatively undertakes to rescue, then he is in a position of liability. So the captain is captured on 2 points, the special relationship and then turning around. Now, if we look at that as just an average person walking on the beach, sees somebody, the special relationship would not apply generally. And I say generally in case they were a doctor, a medical doctor, for example. So, but once a lay person starts the rescue operation, they have put themselves in a position of tort liability. With the repercussion that if you rescue someone and you make things worse, that person can sue you. And the classic example, if you've ever taken swimming lessons, you're always taught how to rescue people and how to flip people over in case there's a spinal injury. So the classic example is you try to help somebody and you cause them to be paralyzed in doing so. So here, as I say, there were 2 points that applied to the captain. One, because of the special relationship, and I would say it's because of the special relationship he had to do something. But second, he also took efforts to turn around.
It
Now,
shows
what-
what? It
sorry?
shows only that he thinks he's in the duty of care, right?
Sorry?
I mean, the fact that he went back is not establishing the duty of care, it just shows that he was also aware that he has a duty
Yeah,
of care.
I think the way the decision is written, it suggests that if he hadn't turned back, he would have fallen below the duty. If he just kept going on.
So basically his action established, yeah.
Not really, it helped him escape liability, I would say. But why did they find no liability factually in this situation?
Because he was dead before he actually hit the water.
Yeah, so the ruling of the court was no type of rescue would have saved Matthews. Because he died, it seems, in the court's opinion, instantaneously. And now, I'm not going to go into how instantaneous that may be. Philosophy is another part.
Is that not a question of causation though?
Sorry?
Is that not a question of causation though? His conduct has got no association with the death.
To some extent, you could say that he hadn't caused anything to do for that.
You don't even have to, it's almost easier, you don't have to even analyze causation.
Well,
You don't have to analyze negligence or duty of care.
Duty of care.
Yeah.
yeah, but in order to get to causation, you have to, like the way this is done, it takes some, it looks at, well, was there a duty in this case? And the court is saying, yes, there's a duty, but it wasn't breached, or he didn't fall foul of it because nothing could have been done.
Can one separate out, by the way, in this jurisdiction, I'm sure you can you separate out and say, let's assume there was a duty, and let's just consider whether or not, we're only going to focus on causation, let's suspend the duty and assume it for the purposes of the
Yeah,
separation.
I don't see anybody going for that. Like, I don't see a defendant's lawyer saying, sure.
Well, the evidence supports, clearly in this instance, medical evidence, whatever, would suggest. I'm just thinking more generally, and can one bring an application for separation?
No.
You can't persuade a court to say, I want to only hear this issue. Because presumably it truncates.
No,
the
you can
hearing.
have a preliminary motion.
Yes.
But here, this went to trial, didn't this go to
No,
the Court of Appeal?
I
Oh, no,
presume
High Court.
so, yes.
So, no, you couldn't do that.
So on a more general basis, one can't bring a separation.
Not what you're asking about.
Okay.
Well, the court wouldn't like to differentiate issues that are so closely related. They all go together.
We can differ about that, but
Yeah, I'm going to move on.
So, you said there was 2 points where we can establish your special relationship and the fact that he undertook the act to rescue.
Yeah.
So, since there was a special relationship from the beginning, we couldn't make the further act. Like, even if he
No.
hadn't,
No, that's what I was saying. I think because there's a special relationship,
so,
he had to do something. That's why I'm saying,
so even if he hadn't turned around the boat, he still,
I think it's a bit more iffy there.
because there is a special relationship, the captain.
Yeah,
Right.
like if he didn't do anything and said, oh, the
This
guy's
is
dead.
worse. Like, this is worse, like, a captain who puts, like, creates a risk in a way that the people that are on the boat. Like, he,
But that's what wasn't clear factually. Did the captain cause this?
didn't cause it, but he was in a special relationship.
Yeah.
Going like,
But why I'm saying, why I'm looking at, because I think the family was alleging the captain messed up somehow. And people don't just easily fall over.
I think it was a little bit high, smoking some dope.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
A bit of a theme.
yeah.
1969, I guess.
That was the time.
I wasn't around then. I hear good things. Uh, What I'm getting at here is, let's, if we change the facts, and the captain just says, oh wow, guy fell in, and carries on, I have a hard time thinking that the court would just let that go. That's why I'm saying, the fact that he turned around, not that it's proof positive, but the way I phrase it, I think to Zita is, I think it helped him escape liability.
So the opposite. Yes. There's no, this act of trying attempt to rescue did not in a way establish or strengthen his duty. That made the way easier for us to accept that he wasn't.
It didn't make him look like a bastard.
Yeah.
I think.
But I think it's like, if there is a duty of
Either
care,
way,
and you
because-
do something, so you are not a bastard, you do your best.
Yeah.
And then it helps you
Yeah, because
to escape liability. But if it's the opposite, if there is no duty of care, and you start to do something, and you behave like there is a duty of care, so then you might put yourself into trouble, because then the court will say, you yourself
but only if there's
admitted there is a duty of care.
but only if
And
there's
now after this,
causation.
difficult to say that you did not have.
But still we need causation. Like
Yeah.
even if
If you roll somebody over who is face down in the water,
but he's already dead, let's say.
okay, that doesn't work.
So
like
let's say
that.
if you do mistake, that's
So that doesn't
the
work.
death has already happened.
Okay, so
Then
what
there
more
is no
can you do?
Let's say it's like the death will happen anyway, then you didn't mess up.
Then you didn't mess up.
Try
So
to
then
resuscitate.
we still need causation even if you did it all wrong.
Okay,
Oh.
okay. I thought you were going in a different direction. Sorry, Enrique.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's not clear from the facts, but in my opinion, alcohol should have had a play in the matter, because I'm sure that the captain owner knew that there was alcohol being consumed by the pump. Unless it's, I mean, if he would have known that, then if you take a look in Ontario, the rules we have in Smart
Yeah.
Serve, there's a duty of care owed by bartenders, waitresses, to the patrons of the bar. I don't see how that doesn't extend it. I get it, he turned back, he's the captain,
Well,
he
that's why-
dives in, who's gonna drive the boat back to safety, I mean, there's a.
That's why I'm saying in this case, I think we have to be careful with what we extract from it.
Yeah,
And why I'm saying, I'm trying to be careful with what has transpired. That the court found the guy was dead as soon as he went in the water, we don't question that too much. And we have these two principles that we can draw from the case. Arguably, they both apply, but as I think Constantina was trying to say, we could just rely on number two and say, well, there's a special relationship. He had an obligation, and that's fine too.
it's a borderline case, there's an obligation, there's a duty of care established, and you do enough to satisfy.
Well, there is a duty,
That's
but it wasn't breached.
based on the simple,
Yeah.
small act.
So when we are looking at a duty of care, we have to establish it was a duty of care and that it was breached. Yeah, Stevenson.
Sorry, can I say, so the notes when you say that the last 2 points are alternatives to each other. So it says rule 3 main points, the last 2 are alternatives to each.
Yeah,
So what do you mean exactly with that?
that's what I was explaining.
Yeah, but
So we have, is there a special relation between the captain and Matthews? Yes.
yeah,
So he had, looking at the principle, at the law, in that circumstance, the captain can't just say the hell with it. He has a duty of affirmative action. Alternatively, you could say, well, he turned around and started the rescue operation. And in doing so, he fell into number 3. So it's kind of Constantina's question, I think you were getting at this as well, that you could argue 2 or 3. So that's what's meant by they can be alternatives to each other.
okay.
Sorry, I see them rather than alternative, I see them as sequential. In the first place, there is a necessary duty as a relationship, and having undertaken that duty, he's breached the duty by following the wrong procedure. But what is the deciding factor here is causation. The three initial factors are satisfied, but causation was not met. So this whole issue is based on causation.
But you
Rather
don't,
than-
don't come to causation until you first clarify.
No, but I'm saying the three first issues, in terms of duty, is established.
Yeah, but
The duty was undertaken, but the duty was breached in the sense that he followed the wrong procedure. At that stage, it could have been held that he was found liable, but the causation of the liability was
Right.
not proven. So it failed on the fourth point rather than the
Right.
first three.
And what I was emphasizing was, we're trying to more abstractly take principles from the case. What I've itemized as 2 and 3 are the points we can take forward. That was just a simple point I was putting forward, more general. So now in Ontario, we have the Good Samaritan Act. Another example is the Bible coming in and making law to some extent. The Good Samaritan is part of the Christian Bible, and it's basically this idea that if you see someone in distress, you should help them, sort of an extension of helping your neighbor. So the Good Samaritan Act provides a statutory defense. If you see this person drowning, you're walking along the beach, you see them drowning, you can go out there, help rescue them, and if you happen to cause them further harm in doing so, you have a statutory defense in section 2 of the Good Samaritan Act. You know, we can sort of step back and look at that sociologically. Why do we need a statute to prove this, to establish this or whatever? I'll just leave it at the more practical point that there's a statutory defense.
but still no duty.
No. So then we get into the interesting cases of drinking. And we start with Jordan House in Menno in early 1970s. We have a patron who was so drunk they threw him out, which is kind of funny in itself, I guess, until he got hit by a car. So then the question is the tavern liable in this situation? Why would they be liable? What would be the argument for Jordan House being liable?
Special regulation.
Okay, explain that. Because this guy's just a paying customer. It's not like it's a ship captain taking some people out, some people want a tour of the harbor front. The ship captain has more responsibility there.
Because they were the ones who put him in this condition. They were serving.
But they didn't force him.
They didn't force him, but they could have
They put him up
refused
to an RV.
to sell more alcohol if they saw
Okay.
that he's so intoxicated that he cannot control himself. He can.
Okay.
They went against what the license stipulates, regarding giving an already intoxicated person more alcohol.
Yeah. Alcohol?
I was gonna basically speak along the same lines. Basically, back when I used to be a bouncer. Essentially, so when I did training for with the gambling commission, or to get a license to do security work and to work, I guess in workplaces that had alcohol, I would say that they pretty much went against the standards that come with that licensing. Right? So they pretty much part of that job would train you. Like how to deal with patrons that are within a bar or in a club, in terms of like when to stop giving alcohol. And to what extent, where your obligations go. So it's like it's not as simple as just throwing them outside the bar,
Yeah.
right? So it extends, that duty care, I would say, extends beyond that.
And that's the important point that comes out of Jordan House, They might have given him a lot of alcohol, but they can't just throw him out and basically say kind of out of sight, out of mind. There are obligations that as such at that point that the patron is too drunk basically to take care of, in this case, himself. So as you read through the passage I gave you, the court says there's an obligation on Jordan House to make sure that Menno got home safely. Which arguably is quite an obligation, if you think about it. Usually, or today I think how it happens is they call you a cab. But if we think about that, there is a bit of onus on a bar to take some level of care when a patron becomes so intoxicated that they become incapacitated. I know if you look on YouTube and look for London, England, there's some crazy videos of people who are so drunk. And then I saw this one where this, she must have been like a banker or something, very well-dressed lady, she's walking along a platform. She was so drunk she fell over and rolled off the platform into the train tracks. Like, that's a special kind of drunk. That you fall down and you can't stop yourself from rolling off the platform. Like, she wasn't near the end of it. She rolled for a minute. Jenny, you had your hand.
Yeah, I was asking, so was there like a separate issue flagged up with vicarious liability? The employee?
No, not in this case.
Okay.
If you have a large staff, then yes, I don't know how this place was staffed. If it was the bar owner that was serving them or not. So if you have a staff that's doing the serving, and we'll see this in the cases, then there will be vicarious liability, and the tavern stands in the place of the server. Picca and Porter. Yeah, this is a Canadian Legion hall. So I can't really visualize this, honestly. The way I've thought about it is, in this hall, there's this area, this hole in the wall. And there's like a bar that goes along it, and drinks just keep coming out of it. That's what this seems to be. So the server was on one side of the wall, and this guy that got really drunk was on the other side, and he seemed to be the only patron. He just kept drinking whatever came through. I guess.
Okay.
So the argument here is, well, the server couldn't tell that the patron was getting drunk because all the server saw was a wall. Couldn't see the customers. And the court said, there's liability in this circumstance. You have to take some level of care when you're serving alcohol in a commercial setting. So I noted that they were found 15% responsible. So this would be a matter of joint and several liability. Joint and several liability meaning, have you come across this before?
Mm-hmm.
What did it mean?
It means that you can ask any of the defendants to pay, and they will, each of them would be able, would have to pay the total amount, and then have a portion of that reimbursed from the other person.
So the plaintiff in this case could sue the Legion only to get 100% of their damages. Then the Legion would have to sue, let's say there are two other parties that are also liable, but were not part of the litigation. The Legion would have to sue those other two parties to get them to pay 85% to the Legion. And the idea is that when there's joint and several liability, all you need to do is sue one of the defendants to to get your 100% of your damages. So that's what's meant by the note on joint and several liability. Schmitz and Sharp, what if the plaintiff wasn't visibly drunk? Then the court says, well, you haven't properly trained your staff. Crocker and Sundance, I find to be a problematic case, because it's basically a case of Crocker versus Sundance. Because basically, what do you do when somebody is hell-bent on drinking and putting themselves in a position to injure themselves seriously? Which is what happened in Crocker and Sundance. Crocker was a guest at this resort. He took an inner tube down the mogul slope, started drinking heavily, drank, it seems like he basically drank for about 24 hours. And then what did he do? He wanted to go down on the inner tube again, and he fell off of it and broke his neck. So put yourself in the position of, sorry.
Sorry, I don't understand this case. What is this intellectual grace?
Well, he signed a waiver. He signed a waiver a day before when he was completely drunk. And he was drunk when he was tubing again,
Yeah.
I think.
I
And
was tubing?
it was all about the waiver.
There's no tubing?
Yeah, think of a big donut that's rubber.
I know, but it's not tubing. I was just
So
didn't think about it.
So put yourself in the position of Sundance, because I think this is a good way to look at the case. You have shown him a video about proper safety. You have tried to keep him from drinking. Your staff have tried to keep him from drinking. And he still wants to, and he gets alcohol and keeps drinking. Then he wants to take part again in inner tube racing down the ski hill. And he injures himself severely. That's a tough situation, I think, to be found liable for. I'm not saying Sundance shouldn't have been found liable. What I'm saying is, what's the threshold? How do you account for free will? I guess, basically. If somebody is going to put themselves in harm's way, at what point does, in this case, a bar or a resort, when is their liability no longer there or diminished?
So the fact suggests to me that this is somewhat of like a nature adventure activity that the resort operates, and that to me suggests, it puts on the table that they are to ensure that they do not have guests who aren't fully capable of operating this inner tube, because it requires you have to be stable in order to maneuver this thing down the slope.
Yeah, I understand, but like, I don't golf, but my understanding is people get drunk on the golf course. Like they bring whatever drinks, and on their course you can get served, I think, as well. And these sort of leisure activities, oftentimes there will be alcohol with it. But you can't, the argument I'm trying to put forward is it not a bit strict in the way that if you're making money and you serve alcohol, you have a higher burden?
But if you're operating a tour, an activity, you are supposed to be operating in a manner that is safe enough for your patrons.
Right. But
it's the same with like
so they should have just stopped him.
Exactly, by all means necessary.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I see another tort action coming if they did it by any means necessary.
Of course not.
No,
like
but like
force.
by physically restraining him, which I think is what would have had to have been done.
No, I mean, they could have called the police or,
It's not leaving him in
Well,
a queue.
the police would have to come before he went down. Like, I think some
or
sort
stop the tour from going out.
maybe, like, I think at some point they would have had to do something physical. I'm not saying beat the guy up.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, say, no, you have to stay here.
Yeah, not to leave him in queue. I guess the queue was the results, so not this queue.
No, he didn't come with one.
I mean, back home, I worked with Chaka, which is a nature adventure company. They do horseback riding, all sort of activities, and we have locations that have alcohol, all of that.
Yeah.
You have a client that's rowdy or too intoxicated, the tour cannot go out. Right? We just have to pause everything
Yeah.
until this person has been removed from the location. So I fully agree that they should be.
It seems like there weren't proper rules in place in this one, like in the resort. And
Yeah,
that contributed to.
fair enough. Like, I think their rules were in place on the premise that you expect people to sort of behave, and if they're told not to do something, they follow instruction. Their rules clearly didn't take into account somebody that said no. Stewart and Petty. Imagine 4 people go out to the bar, and only one is drinking. But guess what? The one that's drinking is Is the bar liable in that case? The court says no. Because it's reasonable for the court to have assumed that a sober person would have been driving. So I think even if we reverse the numbers, there were 3 people drinking and 1 sober. I have a feeling the court would have responded the same way. That the assumption would have been the sober person, what we would call the designated driver, would have been the one not drinking. John Flynn. I'll skip over John Flynn to go to Childs, and that's the last case in this line. Childs is a very contentious decision, I would say. And one of the authors of your tort textbook, Robert Solomon, worked on this case. He has been working with an organization called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And MAD had entered in as an intervener. Have you heard of that before? An intervener? So they obviously, given their name, were trying to say there should be liability in this circumstance. Well, what's this circumstance? How is it different from the cases we've looked at? Well, this is, yeah. Yeah, it's what we might call a social host case, where you have people over, yeah, this was a New Year's Eve party. You have people over at your own home. Guests applied and served their own alcohol. The hosts were not making money off of this. They were just providing locale for the gathering. One of the guests was known to be an alcoholic, had several convictions for drunk driving, had become obviously severely intoxicated during the party, and still drove home. The argument is the hosts let him drive home. He did so, and he struck Zoe Childs, rendering her a paraplegic at 18 years old. So the argument here is that the social host has an obligation, just like the commercial host, arguably. Maybe some differences, but there should, in this case, be an obligation, an affirmative duty to act. And the Supreme Court said no. Why did they say no?
We're talking about the high school.
Sorry? No, I said Charlton Nethermont. Okay, like what? Not quite. I think that's a bit broader than what they said.
They are not getting money, they are not getting paid.
Okay, so they're not commercial hosts. Commercial hosts have further obligations. They're also regulated, commercial hosts.
And they cannot run for the level of investigation as well as commercial hosts.
Yeah.
We want special training, which is the law in Ontario, passport service.
And social hosts don't make a profit.
Yeah, maybe it's contradictory, because they brought their own alcohol,
Yeah.
the one providing it.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I think, I'll put it this way, I think if the Supreme Court was going to find liability for social hosts, these would have been the facts. Why I say that is, Desormeaux he was an alcoholic, had several convictions for drunk driving, was obviously severely intoxicated. You had facts in favor of a social host having to take certain steps. So personalize it, think about yourselves. You invite the community drunk over for a party. You probably are going to keep a watch on this person. So what I'm saying is, there could have been scope here for something not like a commercial host, but maybe a bit closer to that than a social host saying, that's, what's his name? That's Desmond. You know, that guy's incorrigible. This decision, I would say, is a bit problematic for these reasons, yeah?
But if there was found to be liability, then it would open the door for other cases. Let's say I invite 2 friends in my house and I let them drive obviously drunk.
Yeah,
So it would be,
but isn't there a very simple solution to that? You know, you collect their car keys and you get them a taxi home.
is that if the person doesn't do that, I don't know why we should find this person liable. Like it takes
How are they different from Crocker?
because I think the profit, like when you.
But that's the problem, I
Because when
say.
the profit gives an incentive to people to try to sell alcohol, so we want to discourage this behavior. But in social settings, this would be like I am the father and mother of everybody else, and they try to protect the public and from.
Well, you can see, I don't think that's such a big thing, like, I don't post anything for that reason. But, it's like, if you invite people over who you know are hard drinkers, I would think that it's natural to have some sort of extra care over them. Like, we see enough commercials on TV advertising about what you should do if you were out drinking, even if you had a couple of drinks. You know, the host should collect everybody's car keys, keep them in a bowl that only the host knows where it is, and so that patrons have to come to the host to get their car keys. And that's sort of the way that you monitor.
And what if people go to a bar, don't have a social host, and the other person gets drunk, and the other person knows that, and he lets him drive?
Well, Stewart and Petty, right? 4 people in the bar, 3 aren't drinking, 1 is, and the guy who's drinking is the driver.
So the other people couldn't be liable, even if they are in fault. Like they shouldn't have let him drive, but it opens the door to too many court cases.
But I think this leaves the door too open when there could have been something discreet done. Like, keep in mind what I'm saying, everybody knew Desmond was a drunk. Like, there was no surprise here. The fact that he became obviously severely intoxicated, that's like a Tuesday, it seems, for Desmond.
But these people will do it anyway.
But that's
That's
my
why
point.
we can't say that.
We can't say, oh, I didn't make any money. Is money really the only reason to find liability in this kind of circumstance? Because frankly, if I'm Zoe Childs, I'm not too happy with that. I'm a paraplegic at 18. And the Supreme Court is saying, well, they weren't making money off of it.
The person who did that, the drunk person, is liable. We have somebody who is at fault.
Sure.
Why extend this liability to other people?
And this person has an insurance.
Yeah.
And Zoe can get some money from the insurance company.
Sure.
But if I'm a host, I don't have an insurance for parties, and I would have to pay from my own funds.
No, but I'm not necessarily saying there should be, this is a cash cow. What I'm saying is, if we look at some of the functions of tort, wouldn't one of them have been here a bit of a deterrent? In terms of social hosts, not that you shouldn't hold parties, although I wouldn't advise it, but you take care when you have alcohol.
Yeah, but what could you possibly do? For example, like if you are going to a bar, okay, the bartender can simply like refuse to serve you anymore and call a cab.
Right.
For example, but in like social host, what you gonna do? Like if
What I said is, like, if the host collects everybody's car keys when they come in, and you can only get, no, this is quite common. What happened, so if you're hosting a party and people drive, the host generally will have a bowl where everybody's car keys are. And you have to go to the host to get your keys back.
after I heard about the case, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
But let's say I haven't heard about that case, and I had like some guests in my
Yeah.
apartment, and I saw my friend, he became like drunk,
Yeah,
okay, without collecting
Yeah.
the keys, and I asked him like, give me your keys. You
Yeah.
are not allowed to drive, but he insists. In that situation, I cannot do anything.
I resort to battery.
But I was gonna say, I agree with you, I think this case is a dangerous case because it's only common sense. In this particular, I don't think this case is, I've studied it before, but in this particular case, everybody in the party knew that he was drunk and they knew that he was intoxicated. It was obvious to all the patrons of the party. So I can't help but feel you now. Because that is somebody, parties where friends have gotten intoxicated and it was obvious that they were. And there's no way in my mind that I would even let them step out the front door with 17.
Exactly, but
In their hand.
what can you do?
I took my friend Vito's keys once and I threw them in the snowbank.
It helps if you have a pool,
I threw them in the snowbank.
because drunk people don't like to swim.
Yeah.
So you throw the keys in there, unless it's an electric key. We have a problem.
So that ain't your shot.
Amalia,
I'm just wondering if Zoe was in the other car they crashed?
Sorry?
The
No,
18 years old. We're not
she-
sitting in his car, right?
no, she wasn't a passenger, she was a pedestrian. Amalia and then
I
I want to agree with Constantina because first of all, when I came to Canada, the whole thing with alcohol is very strange to me.
every European country.
Yeah, so I cannot understand why this is so big deal, and then there are so many issues about that, but that's a different
Have you
story.
been to London? They just recently made it illegal to drink on the subway. That was like a revolutionary thing. You can still walk and drink.
English things are completely different,
Yeah.
but it's okay. So, but for me, so these people, when say that I have a party, a social, like I'm a social host, and when these people come to my house, they have to think on their own if they are gonna be drunk. So we are equal. They are adults. I am adult. So I don't.
You serve them.
Yeah, but it's different. If I go to a place and I know that I'm going to drink, I don't even drive my car.
But then, this, and I haven't got it, this is the essence of what I'm asking. Are there not circumstances, basically, when we would agree that there should be a duty of affirmative action? And we don't have all agreement here. What I'm saying is, I suggest the facts in Childs move us closer to a point where we could have had that. It's not that everybody's an adult and, you know, like here, if you don't show up every night, okay, my perspective is you're an adult. But when somebody's life is on the line, I see that as a bit different. When we know that drinking and driving is an issue, that, I say, is a different circumstance from maybe you might fail a course. Yeah, it's very, very different. So that's why.
I can see the difference in what you mean, but still I cannot understand or accept why I have to be liable for that.
Yeah, well, I would suggest that it's not necessarily that you be liable. There are certain steps you can take, minimal steps, that maybe could have worked in this circumstance. Like, if the host had kept the keys of Desmond's car, guy's walking home, and Zoe can walk.
I think the Supreme Court's distinction between social gatherings and this bar issue is correct, because in social setting, people may not have enough manpower or enough rules to organize the events or monitor the guests, whether they are drunk or not, or whether they are driving while they are driving. These kind of things could be difficult if you think within this concept.
Yeah.
But what I disagree with this decision is the foreseeability of these accidents. I think he is known as a drunk person and he's driving while he's drunk, so I don't understand why the Supreme Court didn't see any foreseeability.
I don't understand what you're saying, because you're saying, isn't it foreseeable that he would have caused somebody harm, but the social host shouldn't be liable? I don't understand.
So in the Supreme Court's decision,
Yeah.
the Supreme Court says it's not foreseeable for him to.
For the social host.
Yeah. I mean, social hosts may not know that this drunk person could result in accident.
Yeah.
But the social host could know because he's a well-known person, he's a drunk person, so he's driving.
Yeah.
For him, there can be a foreseeability link.
But isn't that a point in my favor, so to speak? Like, that's why I'm saying these facts, I think, show that there can be not huge precedents, but if you invite the community drunk over and he gets drunk, surprise, surprise, don't let him drive. And like that, to me, it's more discreet. It's going along with exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's
but-
foreseeable that he's been convicted of drunk driving.
Yeah, foreseeable, but on the other aspect, it's not preventable. They can't control the guests.
I don't know, like,
Why? I mean, okay, I'm not having big parties, but I'm having sometimes 10 guests. And I know one of my friends' husband is a little bit problematic with alcohol. I'm not giving a
What
glass
if you
of
are
wine
drunk
to him. I'm giving a glass, and 2 hours later another glass, and I'm not letting him drink as much as
But
he
in
wants,
parties-
because I don't want him to have problems.
In parties, it's different from bar setting. The barman don't drink, but as a social host, you may drink. You may not know what's happening in your
I'm not-
house.
I think one thing should be made clear. I'm not suggesting that a social host should be put in the place of a commercial host. I'm saying in circumstances of Childs, don't we have particularized facts that suggest maybe something extra should have been done.
Maybe they just didn't want it really to have so many cases.
Well, yeah, I think,
Probably that's
I see this as a
why.
very blunt separation. If you make money by selling alcohol, you have extra burdens. But if you just have friends over and somebody drives drunk, there's no liability. And I have a problem with just a very blunt distinction here, given these facts. That's the point. I'm not trying to argue with you, because it seems that I'm trying to say, I think there's more scope here than the Supreme Court was allowing.
Yeah, I mean, technically here, there is no foreseeability, but there's proximity.
I say there's still foreseeability. If the guy's been convicted of drunk driving,
Yeah,
the
that's
likelihood
for-
he's going to get number 5, I think the money's pretty good. You know, assuming he had 4 previous convictions. Theodore, you had your hand up now.
Yeah, my question is, let's put aside the issue of, driving, like not allowing the guests to drive back home.
Right.
Assuming, because the guy was drunk, he decides to, probably chill out somewhere around your balcony and falls off the building and dies. Is there a liability? Because he was drunk and the party was at your house.
I don't see how that would, if we're looking at analogies, I don't see how it would be analogous. I see that more as an accident than looking at giving keys to a vehicle to a guy like Desmond, where a vehicle can be an agent of severe harm. I see those as very different scenarios.
Okay, so that will be considered as an accident.
If somebody just falls off, even if they are drunk, I would see that as being very different in terms of liability than this. Your hand up, you too.
My gut feeling is that actually the case, I agree with you that it's wrongly decided. And means whether the host is profit from the activity is not so important. But my question is that whether this case means the rationale behind the Reiner and the Fletcher, the ratio, Reiner and the Fletcher, there's a decision that if you bring something that to your land that it has the potential to do mischief, then you have to be accountable for those mischief that materialized.
Okay.
So here, actually, you can draw an analogy that you bring those alcoholic to your house and you serve them vehicles, then essentially you're turning them from maybe a normal human being to a beast. And armed with them, equipped with them, the vehicle that has the potential to do damage to others. So whether you can draw the analogy so that we use the same ratio in the Van Dutch case to say that this is kind of misuse of your land and the cost.
Okay, I can see the analogy you're making.
My point is the Supreme Court of Canada decided correctly, actually. I just agree. And my question is, I got a home, there is a similar case, but in that case, the wife and husband were convicted. The case is very similar. Well, only difference is the drunken guy, I think he was lured. He was lured and he was forced to drink heavily.
Okay.
Like husband and wife, like kind of conspired because they didn't like each other. But they pretended to be like social host.
Marriage doesn't look very good.
Social host, but then he just drove away and then he just drove the motorcycle.
Right.
Motorcycle, and then it was very cold during the January, and he was just cold to death. He was frozen.
Okay.
Yeah. But thing is they said that would it have been like different scenario if somebody was the social host made him get drunk?
Yeah, well, I think based on the principles that we were looking at, if you have a role in making the problem, you have a responsibility.
So on the thing is it's proof, right? Proof, investigation technique.
Yeah.
Well, if the host is serving the alcohol, it's a different story.
But intention, you don't know
And
intention.
they all brought their own drinks. But if the host is serving the alcohol, that's a different story.
But you never know. Who knows somebody intentionally just serving you alcohol again and again. But intention is try to, make your problem. Try to like get drunk and you just go away.
Well, I'm open to that.
That's
someone else is running. Why not? I don't know.
Just by changing some details of the scenario of this case.
Okay.
What if the decimal, the decimal, is not invited directly by the social host, but was introduced by one of the guests to the party?
Was a +1
Plus,
kind of thing. Like they themselves weren't invited, but they came with someone who was.
Yeah, so how about the guest who invited him to
Yeah.
that party should be liable as
I
the
don't-
social host?
I don't see how that would be the case. Like, again, what I'm saying is, if you know certain things about the person that's coming over,
And
then isn't there
the
scope?
host do not know exactly
Yeah.
the habits of this
Then
movement. Who invite him know that? So it's indirect.
Yeah,
So
and
I
they
don't
don't
think,
tell. I assume what you're saying. They don't tell the host. This guy's a bit
Right.
drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that would be different. But that's why I tailor what I'm saying to these facts only, that if we were ever going to have a case that said there is scope for some sort of obligation on a social host, I think these would have been the facts to have premised that on, because of all that was known about the guy.
I have
So-
another question. Sorry, another question. What if, in this case, the child is the third party of the party, the social party, the child. I mean.
What do you mean third
The
party?
victim is
Yeah.
not who joined the party. But what if the decimal injured in the accident? Could he sue the social host?
It has happened. Why'd you let me drive drunk?
Yeah.
Yeah, why did you sit with someone?
What, and like, whether or not it'd be successful, it depends on the facts of it. Like,
Not to rely.
if they were serving alcohol and it wasn't a bring your own kind of thing, then maybe there's more scope for liability for the host in that case. Ebra had his hand up for a while.
No, it's the same.
Okay.
We have been discussed.
Zita?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because basically all the courts said the same, but different reasoning, right? Trial court said that they have a prima facie duty of care, but for policy reasons negative. So I'm just wondering what kind of policy they were, I mean, what was their reasoning?
I don't remember offhand. I gather it was similar to what I wrote down for the Supreme Court though. Those are the three points.
Because, I'm just wondering, because even if the result is the same, there is no liability, it's not the same. If there is a duty of care, but there is a policy reason, like, let's say we don't want to open too many cases,
Yeah.
or so social host, we don't want, whatever is the policy, because then this can change, right? Or we say there is no duty of care at all, because of proximity.
I'll posit the scenario afterwards, but I just want to check something for clarity.
Yeah.
What is the lack of proximity? I don't understand the lack of proximity between the parties, because
What the Court of Appeals said?
stress the lack of
Supreme Court.
proximity, distinguishing social. I mean, it seems to me that if you know your guest and you're the host, I don't understand what the lack of proximity is really.
Foreseeability.
No, proximity he's talking about. So proximity in a commercial setting would, you're serving the drinks. You have, so where did it go? The first point in the quotation I gave you.
They supplied their own.
So the commercial host has a greater capacity to monitor. Whereas a social host, and this has been said by others already, a social host doesn't necessarily know what each guest has drunk.
Yeah, I suppose the commercial host doesn't either. There's one barman.
Well, they have a bill.
200 patrons.
Yeah, but they would have, they're probably running a tab.
And what if it's a group of 20 people? But okay, I hear. I want to do on your kind of critique of the case.
Yeah.
Let's assume that I know somebody has a nut allergy, and I know that I'm potentially serving something that has nuts, and it's going to cause them.
Do you like the person?
I generally don't like people, so probably not. But or take epilepsy or something where somebody can drive, but they can get set off at any time, and they're potentially unhealthy.
Yeah.
Are you obliged as a host to preclude somebody from leaving? If you know that they've already had an accident in the past, but they're not precluded from driving. And you're serving
if they have a nut allergy.
Pardon me?
If they have a nut allergy.
Either nut allergy or they can't eat fatty food or whatever, and that could set off something,
some allergic reaction.
Potentially.
Okay.
On your thesis, you would have to go. It's a much more benign sort of.
Yeah, I don't think it would go that far. Because, well, people who, if we take a nut allergy, just to make it simple, people with nut allergies usually carry something called an EpiPen.
Yes.
So that if they have a reaction, they can deal with it immediately. I don't think that necessarily goes on to a social host liability kind of scenario. Here with the case of Childs, I just think there were too many facts in favor of saying, what's the likelihood something bad will happen? I'm betting the odds are high, given these facts.
Yes, it's so visible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, the guy's had multiple convictions for drunk driving. Like, how many is too many? Theodore has
yes, concerning social host, sometimes you never know how many bottles or whatever shots the person you're inviting had wherever he's coming from.
Sure.
And probably at your place the person drank just one.
Yeah.
But while the person drove off, obviously the person started getting
He started hitting them.
Yes. So in that situation, how do you blame the social host?
Well, I'm not proposing to blame the social host in that situation.
Okay.
I'm proposing to blame or hold the social host to some sort of standard of liability when they invite a guy who has several convictions for drunk driving over, somebody who is an alcoholic and who has become obviously severely intoxicated, and you allow him to take a vehicle out and drive it in public. That's where I think there's a threshold for something to be said.
Yeah, but then that is when, it's very, obvious or visible that you can tell this person is drunk.
Yeah, but this didn't result in liability. That's my point.
Well, isn't the question, you get that special relationship and material contribution if you serve as a host, if you serve the alcohol, you're responsible. The child doesn't protect you. As a host, if you serve the alcohol, you ensure that someone got drunk and went behind the wheel of the car, you're on the hook, period. Child doesn't protect you because you were the one in charge of serving the alcohol and you actually allowed someone who was a walking menace to drive.
Yeah.
So trans is in very specific circumstances where you had almost bunch of people almost drinking on the street. It's New Year's Eve. and they came to your apartment. Where's the foreseeability or proximity there? It's like punching bags. Whereas if you take a responsibility, take a charge, serve the alcohol, you're on the hook. Absolutely. Right? No?
I didn't want to go into it because I wanted to take the break, but what I'll say is, I don't think having a bring your own beer kind of thing should be the only threshold, like it was here. Because I still think these facts present some, a situation of liability beyond what you're saying. If you provide the alcohol, then you're liable, but what I'm saying is, even if you don't, and you let an alcoholic rock up to your place with the LCBO van behind them, I think there's a problem. You know, that's what I'm saying. And it's not a matter of only if you serve and you were the controller of all the alcohol. So we'll take a break until 6:40, until 8, and then we'll come back with specific. Michelle's father saw this, ran onto the grass, and was killed after he threw his son to safety. So he was killed by a train passing through. Is there a duty of care owed to the rescuer, who was the father? So Vidian versus British Transport.
As I understood, because the father was the station master,
Yeah.
there was duty of care recognized
And-
because the train driver,
Yes.
he should have foreseen that there could be railway employees
Yeah.
on track.
Which is interesting, because what does it tell us by what it doesn't say? It suggests that if this guy wasn't a railway employee,
If it was a trespasser, there is no duty of care. Because
Yeah.
you don't expect anyone to be there, like a regular person.
but I think given these facts, it's an interesting variation, because any parent whose child wanders onto railway tracks is going there, to grab the kid. But it just so happened that a duty of care was owed to Vidian because of the position he held. As was said, because he was a railway employee. So again, to reiterate the point, what we take from that in terms of a duty to a rescuer is, there's no duty to a rescuer in that circumstance. There was a duty to a fellow railway employee who just happened to be the one trying to save his son. So it's a discrete finding here. And then we have Horsley McLaren. If you recall, we looked at this before with Matthews, where Matthews was the one that fell in. Well, Horsley didn't like what was going on and went in after his friend into frigid Lake Ontario. And he met the same fate. So was there a duty of care owed by the captain to Horsley? And the court said no. And they applied the ruling in Vidian. They said there's no duty of care owed to Horsley because McLaren, the captain, had told him to stay on the vessel, and there was nothing McLaren had done to induce Horsley to attempt a rescue. So basically, it extends the point we already looked at with Matthews, that if you created the circumstances of the peril, you have an obligation. But here, McLaren, as captain, had not. Therefore, there was no duty to rescue. Yeah.
So they're saying, excuse me, McLaren, the captain did not create the situation with Horsley, but he did with the initial person?
No, he didn't with them either.
With either?
Yeah.
Okay.
He had no hand in anything.
Nothing, okay.
So we've talked a bit about it already, but going to the heading developments in the duty of care analysis, notes. I think I took out, you don't have injuries to the unborn, right? I usually take that out.
Yeah.
You do have it?
No, you remove it.
Okay. I don't go through, basically you have it in the textbook, but the injuries to the unborn case is basically where somebody has had a medical procedure not to get pregnant or have children, and it was a botched attempt. The operation failed because the people had a child. And so these are people saying, I'm suing because I have a child. So I'm moving on to that. So developments in the duty of care. We've talked about Rankin's garage, I think a fair bit. So I want to move to the next case that I've listed for you to read. The Numbered Ontario Company and Maple Leaf Foods. In this case, I've added in because I think well, for two reasons. One, I put it here to look at the duty of care, obviously. But two, it anticipates what we look at the end of the course with the overlap of negligent misrepresentation and misrepresentation in contract. So what happened in this case?
Sorry, what case?
The numbered company case. I gave it to you to read. It was a link. There was a hyperlink in the notes. You click the hyperlink.
So the corporation you have had some food is infected with
Yes.
listeria or some sort of bacterial food poisoning, and when they found out, they gradually let the public know as they were trying to investigate the contamination. And when they were releasing the canned meat, or the type of canned meat that was, and who could possibly be infected or come in contact with the canned meat, they mentioned Mr. Submarine, who was one of the largest.
Maple Leaf supplied
Supplied
Mr. Submarine with its meats.
Yeah, and it was an exclusive arrangement, from my understanding.
Yep.
So the franchisor made the franchise supply directly from Maple Leaf, which is how that works with that franchise. And what's interesting in this case is that there was a class action suit brought by the franchisees, the franchisor, so all the independent shop owners of some shops to sue Maple Leaf for foreseeable losses or for losses.
Now, what were the losses they were alleging?
They were alleging that they lost, one was goodwill.
Yeah.
And B was the loss of sales or future profits. Because they were saying because their name was associated with people would be,
Go ahead, Subway.
Yeah, and be hesitant to buy Subway or Firehouse. And therefore, they should have foreseen that loss. Because I think the court ruled that they acted diligently, they announced that the meat was clean, effectively, they tried to protect the public. And there was never any proof that anybody that purchased a Mr. Submarine was even harmed or injured or even sick because of the meat.
Yeah.
So it wasn't reasonably foreseeable for them to foresee a loss of future profits for an outbreak, which we were trying to. This was a health issue, so it wasn't really an issue of profit.
Yeah, well, it was a money issue.
Yeah.
So this case falls under the heading of pure economic loss. So remember we've talked about money and how in the common law money has been seen even now as a bit druggy, something we shouldn't talk about too much. That's what pure economic loss is, where your only loss is money. And just to sort of repeat a bit what Enrico said, Mr. Submarine made its franchisees buy from Maple Leaf Foods, and the franchisees said, well, once Maple Leaf Foods was caught up in this scandal of contaminated meats, we lost money. We took a reputational hit. So we suffered pure economic loss. So think about what the franchisees are saying in that. They're trying to say that Maple Leaf Foods owed them a duty of care. What was that duty of care?
To provide with the meat.
Yeah, well, that was contractually what they were obliged to do, right? Because they were buying from Maple Leaf Foods.
Provide meat that was fit for human consumption, that was the only duty of care that they really owed.
Yeah, but the franchisees were trying to push that further. So what's their allegation? That it wasn't just a duty of care to provide meat that was fit for people to eat, but
Representation of the meat for human consumption.
that's what we said.
Yeah.
No, but what were the franchisees, they're trying to get money. So what's their allegation here in terms of the duty of care owed by Maple Leaf Foods to them?
They damaged their goodwill, but they should have seen that by this contamination would have damaged their profits.
To protect
because they
their
sold from their
interests.
goodwill.
Yeah, so they were enlarging the duty of care to include protection against reputational harm. So it's first important, I think, in learning or understanding what we're talking about with duty of care, to understand what people are doing when they make these allegations. Even if they're not successful, this case is showing that the franchisees are trying to say, yeah, we know you have a duty of care to provide us with meat fit for human consumption, but you also, attached to that, have a duty of care not to ruin our reputations as a source of food that won't make you sick. Why? Because Maple Leaf Foods was wrapped up in this scandal of contaminated meats. None of those had gone to Mr. Submarine. There were no cases of Mr. Submarine customers being sick, but the franchisees were saying, that doesn't matter. We were hit anyway. Because people made the link between Maple Leaf Foods and Mr. Submarine, that Maple Leaf supplied Mr. Submarine, and now everybody's staying away and going to Subway. So we think you, Maple Leaf Foods, owe us a duty of care in that circumstance. And the court said no. Why would they say no?
There's no proximity, because, so
I have a question.
they're buying to distributors they're buying because they have to, because the franchise says you have to buy them.
Right, but there's still proximity. Like they're buying from Maple Leaf
They're
Foods.
buying from distributors, from.
Well, yeah,
So it's like.
but isn't that, didn't we do that with Donahue and Stevenson?
Yeah, third party, yeah.
Yeah, so there's still liability for people who produce goods to the ultimate consumer. Talor, you have
Yes, so my question is like, are they obliged to buy from only makers?
Yeah. So they can't go to Loblaws. Or Pusatari's or Whole Foods or wherever. Why do you think they should be liable?
It's contractual obligation as well. If they have contract with Maple Leaf Foods to purchase from them, so Maple Leaf Foods should, yeah, definitely has duty of care by like relying on the contractual relationship as well, that they have to provide like goods which are like ready to people consumption.
Yeah, but that's not an issue, right? The issue is, beyond that, Maple Leaf Foods has a duty of care to the franchisees not to ruin their income. Put sort of.
It's really low.
Why?
Well, then, every other seller of the product would be suing the company for reputational harm. And it would be the endless chain of who can sue for anything and everything. Somewhere you have to draw the line and say, well, this particular group of people maybe, but everyone beyond that, everyone beyond the customer or consumer, ultimate consumer, is way too much. You cannot blame Maple Leafs for anything and everything, being a corporation producing the food. All of a sudden, everyone turns out and say, well, I'm selling sandwiches at Aroma made out of your meat. Now, I want to sue. And, mind you, there were no any indications that any food poisoning ever happened.
Right.
So, remoteness, I think, here is in place also like a too wide class of people.
Okay, indeterminacy.
Indeterminacy.
Maybe. I think, so just to modify it, because Dayon brings up remoteness, and I want to clarify some. Remoteness, in terms of negligence, is the fourth step in establishing a claim. And I draw that out only because with Rankin's Garage, we got into this discussion that the majority seem to be using remoteness type language at the duty of care stage. And it's kind of confusing. And arguably Rankin's Garage, the clarity of it is diminished because of the loose language. What I say here is, we can, if we apply this as a novel duty of care case, is it reasonably foreseeable? We could question that. Is there proximity? We could question that, but then we have the dual stages of proximity, of policy.
General policy then.
So we can, that's why I gave you this case, to have an opportunity to look at, well, how would we apply that Anne's Cooper type test here? Not to say that Dayon's wrong, it's more, I think we need to stick with the language of the test. Because we see what happens when the Supreme Court doesn't do that with Rankin's Garage. So what we're talking about here is it reasonably foreseeable that if Maple Leaf Foods handles its meat improperly, that it will cause harm to others? Well, who are the others?
No, the customers.
To customers, but these are the customers. Right.
Marmalade has duty of care to their customers.
Right, but these aren't customers necessarily. Like I think, unless you're talking about consumers.
Consumers.
Yeah.
Consumers,
But
not
the
the franchisees.
Yeah.
That's what the court said.
So the court at that first stage is saying, well, no, that's beyond what would be reasonably foreseeable. And I think they're getting into proximity in their discussion. Proximity between the Maple Leaf Foods and the franchisees. But as Dayon said, I think we can come up with some policy reasons as well that could be layered in. One was indeterminacy. I don't know about that here because I think this is a defined class, only franchisees. But I would say that it's arguably extending pure economic loss, duty of care, too far. Beyond what it would really be able to handle, because, and I think what Dayon was saying was not indeterminacy in terms of the class, but if you provide a good and you are part of bad press, can anybody you sell that good to sue you for reputational harm? I think that's what we've got at. And that's just too, there's a policy reason not to go that far. And I think we've seen already, just in the couple of days we've had, that the courts are very concerned about not widening the scope of the duty of care. And this arguably would really widen it to a significant extent. Enrico and then Constantino.
And on the flip side, what would they do, what would be the flip side if they didn't alert the public about the contaminated soil? any other franchise, like McDonald's was affected.
Yeah.
So if they had withheld that information, you'd probably see a bunch of lawsuits, like, that they didn't protect their interests by notifying the public
Yeah.
that someone was contaminated. So really, I think that's what strikes at the heart of the policy decision, is like, if they didn't tell people, look, Subway could be infected, this company can be infected, this could be, and you ate it, then there'd be an issue, right?
Yeah.
For policy reasons, they have to announce to the public, don't eat here, or beware, don't,
Yeah.
what were they supposed to do?
Well, they probably have a regulatory obligation to
Right.
announce.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So by fulfilling your regulatory obligation, you
The
try to
franchisee.
balance that, you try to
Yeah.
balance that against, being sued by franchisees for
Yeah.
ruining their reputation. Policy-wise, does it make sense to extend that duty of care to the franchisees?
Constantine?
And it seems that the code also relates to the scope of the contractual undertaking. What's the relation between, when you have a contract
Yeah.
between the tenant and the defendant, and you have also duty of care as an argument, does the obligations that arise from, the interpretation of obligations that arise from the contract inform the duty of care? Like, does the fact that we have a contract, do we have to go to interpretation of the contract in order to see?
Sometimes we do. We saw that with exclusion clauses.
Yeah,
Right.
because if in 84 they mention about the scope of what are the obligations that are being undertaken. So it seems that the contract, the content of the contract informs how large or small the duty of care is.
Yeah, so if you recall, when we talked yesterday about Caparo, I think this provides an illustration. What was the purpose of the report provided by Dickman? It was for the audit, but not to purchase the company. So if we apply that here, the obligation of Maple Leaf Foods was to provide meats that were fit for human consumption. Nothing more than that purpose. Whereas the franchisees are trying to say, well, there's more to it than just providing us with meat. They have a duty to make sure they don't hurt our economic position.
And by the same time, not, rescinding the contract.
Yeah.
Franchisees, they want the
Contractual,
contract.
I mean,
They
they
want the
start-
contract. They want to be in a business because it makes money.
Yeah.
But they want more.
Yes.
I want a contract that I want money from. So that's kind of, backdoor entrance to,
Yeah.
You can ask,
stealing off
maybe
some
they
money.
can, I mean, they can have
Why didn't they just,
discussions about the contractual issues.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Maybe
But that
to
would
use
be-
the fee for the year
Well,
or
but
whatever,
then
but that's
this is
a
why we
contract.
have in this course that overlap with tort and contract. Because arguably, Maple Leaf Foods fulfilled their contract. They didn't give them contaminated meat. There's no evidence of that. So the only thing that the franchisees can do is sue in tort. To say, well, you breached a duty of care to us. The problem for the franchisees is they have to first of all establish that there's a duty of care owed to them for this purpose. And the Court of Appeal says, no.
And it mentions also the contract. So the existence of a contract, when we discuss if there is a duty of care, it's relevant to see the contract.
It can be relevant,
Like,
yes.
it seems that certain contracts are different, let's say, sources of obligations, but when we have a contractual relationship between the parties,
In a commercial setting,
Yes, in
we
a
have an
commercial-
overlap
Yes.
between tort and contract.
so it's relevant to see what the contract says.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's always so. For example, the clearest example is an exclusion clause, where you have a tort claim that looks like it could be successful, but if the exclusion clause is effective, you can't bring it. So that's where we have a very clear overlap between the two. And then I'll come to you.
Am I correct that the Court of Appeal took the view that the end users, i.e. consumers, I suppose, was owed the duty of care by Maple Leaf,
Yeah,
So,
but that wasn't something they looked at here.
no, I understand that. I want to build on that. But
Yeah.
isn't the point that when this is really a case that illustrates the court's reluctance to extend the duty of care for a pure economic loss? I think you've made that point, but isn't it? Because to my mind, the end user is further removed from the manufacturer than, say, the franchisee, because they one down on the chain.
Yeah.
Yet the court is prepared to recognize that duty to, let's say, the fourth
Yeah.
person down the chain,
Right.
but not to the third person down the chain.
No, but the food still had to be fit for human consumption.
No, I hear. All I'm saying is that there's a closer connection between the franchisee and the manufacturer than there is between the consumer and the manufacturer. And the only real distinction is that the end user would suffer physical loss and or illness, death, whatever, and the franchisee is suffering pure economic loss. And that's the distinction, or the principle, perhaps.
Okay.
It's a thought.
Sure. I thought that came from the case. So, maybe I'm not understanding what.
I guess what I'm saying is that it seems somewhat odd that the court's prepared to recognize a duty to a party that's further removed, but
Yeah.
not a duty to a party that's closer connected.
No, I understood that. I don't necessarily accept that point just because there would be other factors involved, like the regulatory aspects. You know, like going back to Donahue and Stevenson, that a person producing goods owes a duty of care to their neighbor, who's their neighbor, the end user. So I don't think they're necessarily jumping over sort of this sequence to find to the end, because they're saying the food has to be fit for consumption, and that goes through the chain. So if Maple Leaf Foods gave old meat to Mr. Submarine, that would be wrong. Just as if Mr. Submarine sold it on. But here, the point is more the economic loss that Mr. Submarine franchisees suffered was not subject to a duty of care that Maple Leaf Foods owed.
Except it is foreseeable, because to the extent that you supply food that's not fit for consumption, and you know there's a party in the chain that's going to be selling that on, you know that you can foresee that they will suffer reputational damage.
Sure, but that didn't in fact happen. If they had sold contaminated meat on to Mr. Submarine, then maybe we'd have a different case. But because the evidence was, like, I'm just making this up, all the contaminated meat went to Lawbells, then all that the franchisees are saying that happened was Lawbells got it, so the public doesn't make a distinction, they're gonna stay away from us because they know we get our meat from Maple Leaf. That's it.
Okay, I hear you.
Yanni.
I'm thinking if we have a relationship, special relationship,
Yeah.
franchisee, franchisor, aren't you then, the franchisor, responsible to conduct business in a way that will protect me, franchisee, and my name?
I'm laughing because I don't know franchise law very well, but I know lots of franchisees take the franchisor to court on that very premise. Like Tim Hortons, the franchisees didn't like what Tim Hortons was doing with how they arranged things. Pizza franchisees have said Pizza is sucking us dry. They overcharge us for dough or whatever. Yeah, so does the franchisor have to work in the best interests of the franchisee? Arguably, that's the general principle, but just like good faith, there's sort of debate as to what that constitutes. in different opinions. Like the franchisor will say, well, we're the ones that built up the name, people are only going to your shop because of our name, suck it up. You know, and the franchisees are saying, well, we can barely keep the shop open because you're charging us so much for the products, because we have to get them through whoever you make an agreement with.
Okay, but in this instance, there's this, to me, reckless way of conducting business.
How was it reckless?
Sending out contaminated meat.
Well, they didn't do it on purpose, right? Like, it was somehow it got contaminated. I don't know how, nor was that an issue here. The franchisees were saying, we suffered a reputational hit. Not that we got contaminated food, but because Maple Leaf Foods is in the midst of this news report about contaminated meats, people are staying away from us. So that's sort of beyond what anybody could necessarily manage in terms of what you were talking about, like the franchisee, franchisor.
No, I mean, I know it's not the issue of meat,
Yeah.
but I think it's reasonably foreseeable that if you, the franchisor, act in such a rash, reckless manner to taint the name of the business that I am paying you for, then
Okay.
there's some relation.
So as a general point, because that wasn't in the case, right?
It's not,
Yeah.
but that's just my thought.
Okay, well, yeah, like if the franchisor did that, like ran the name, you know, Donald Trump took over, whatever we're talking about, Mr. Submarine, and tanked the name, then yeah, that could be a claim.
But the name was tainted.
No, but it wasn't tainted because of the franchisor.
Maple Leaf.
Maple Leaf isn't the franchisor.
Right.
Maple Leaf supplies the meat to the franchisees pursuant to a contract that the franchisor agreed to with Maple Leaf Foods. That there be an exclusivity agreement, and presumably because there's exclusivity, there be a deal on the finances.
Okay, I thought there was.
Maybe in this case, we can talk about breach of a contract because of sending spoiled meat to the.
If they sent spoiled meat though, remember here they didn't with Mr. Submarine. That's not at issue here.
And also here, what I recognize from the decision that the court does not want to accept there is harm to the name of the Mr. Submarine.
I don't think
they are.
I wouldn't say that that's what they're saying. I don't think they pronounced on it. I think they're saying there's no duty of care owed. So.
But they're not accepting there's a reputational damage on the name of.
No, I don't think they pronounced on it because, so the way I'm separating it is, in order to say there's no duty of care owed by Maple Leaf to the franchisees, the Court of Appeal does not have to say anything about whether or not there was reputational harm.
Because it's a moot issue.
Yeah.
But isn't it one of the conditions of tort law? There must be a harm, and it must be foreseeable. And
right, but
there must be proximity.
But not every harm results in a tort, or, for our purposes, a duty of care.
If there is no harm, can we talk about tort?
Yeah, like harm, it can be sort of elastic, which is what the franchisees are trying to do. But just because there is some loss suffered by the franchisees does not correlate to a successful action against Maple Leaf Foods. And part of that analysis was there was no duty of care. Oh, sorry?
Economic loss is generally more considered in contracts, right?
No, it's a big area of tort.
I know,
You can
but
make a
court
big
usually-
living
court
off of it.
usually try to put put the victim into the situation where he would have been for if the torch happened, the torch is not happening, right? If the torch is activity is not happening.
Yeah.
And in the contract, it's the opposite, right? If there is a breach.
Give me what I
If
expected.
there is a breach, then
Give me what I expected to get.
give me what I expected to
Right.
get. So economical loss, it's very normal in contractual sense. I expected to get much bigger profits.
Yeah, but the franchisees are saying, we want to be put back to the way things were before the scandal. And since we've lost money, you put us back to that point. That's what they're saying. That's why it is a tort. It wouldn't be a contract issue, because they Maple Leaf didn't breach the contract. Again, to be clear, I get the sense maybe it isn't. Maple Leaf did not supply Mr. Submarine with contaminated meat. There's no issue there whatsoever. So the only thing that the franchisees are arguing on is, because Maple Leaf Foods is across all the newspapers on the front page, scandal, meats from Maple Leaf Foods will kill you. Nobody wants to go to Mr. Submarine because everybody knows Maple Leaf Foods supplies Mr. Submarine. And we only suffered economic loss. So that it's still, you can have economic loss in contract or tort, but really what steers you in terms of your claim is, what can you claim? And what's very clear from Maple Leaf Foods is there's no contractual claim. So why in this course we put it together is, oftentimes you will find there's no contractual claim. Because a well-written contract will usually curb or limit the success of those. And generally, performance satisfies a contract. So you're really getting down to looking at, well, how good was the performance? And that's where we're getting to tort, that you were careless in your performance. Amelia and then Tim.
So, generally speaking, is there a specific order that the court follows to examine that part? So, if there is a harm or loss, and then if there is a duty of care, or there is not a specific order of analysis?
Well, I think like the duty of care analysis subsumes the idea that there was loss. So, because we've talked about it a lot, I'm hoping it's a bit more familiar. Think of Rankin's Garage. Why is the kid suing? I forget his condition. Let's say he's brain damaged. There's the harm or loss. So you sort of reverse engineer things. That's generally how lawyers do it. Well, here's something that happened. Let's trace back the sequence of events leading up to it and see what we can, who would be liable, who could be liable. So as part of that analysis, you're steered by the test, the duty of care test. Now, what's unfortunate about Rankin is even the Supreme Court couldn't agree as to which test to use. Ans Kamloops or Ans Cooper. But if we simplify it, we just use Ans Kamloops, Ans Cooper, because this would be a novel duty of care in the Maple Leaf case. We go through our analysis. So there has to be some loss or harm in order to even go to the extent of considering a claim. Yeah.
So you must have dealt with the point, but just to reiterate, I think the whole thing boils down to the scope of duty that Maple Leaf owed to the franchisees. They didn't owe a duty to protect their reputation, they owe a duty to provide safe meats.
Yeah.
And they did fulfill that duty. They did not provide the franchisees with bad meat.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of that. And that's the lock, stock, and barrel generally of the scope of the case. I mean, first of all, even if we say that there is a duty, a proximity, it ultimately boils down to the scope of that duty.
Yeah, but let's say I gave this, that we didn't cover this case and I gave it to you as an exam question. I would be looking for how you treated both sides. So that would necessitate you thinking through, well, the only thing I see here is pure economic loss as an argument. I don't think it will work, and my advice to a client would be, I don't think this will work, but it's your money. So you present that to them. So why I do it that way is because in practice, this is what you're called upon to do. People will come to you not with very easy questions. And you have to think in a very elastic manner in order to address what it is that they're looking at. So I'd rather, and since we're learning it now, I'd rather get you into that mindset of thinking of both sides and make that a habit.
No, I appreciate that, but I was just saying the silver bullet in the case.
No,
is-
I understood
is
that. I was going further to saying what I think a further point to take from this is think about the argument. And like, I think it's been fruitful to go through the case because it, one, shows the overlap of contract and tort. Two, it shows us ends, can, loops. Three, it shows us some of the different arguments that you can come up with. And these are all germane to the final exam and the essay. So that was more, that wasn't overshadowing the point you made. I think I noted a bit earlier too that the purpose of the contract was provide safety, and the franchisee would kind of extend that when they could.
An exam, so we would advise our client because of this case that the pure economic loss is possibly will not establish a duty of care, but we should also provide arguments. The other side that even though we know about this case, what arguments will be presented to the court if our client wants to.
Yeah, so the client wants to know, do I have a claim?
We say that we propose that the claim maybe will not be successful, like we.
Yeah.
But if the client insists on it,
Then you do it.
so if the exam should include arguments,
No.
no.
No, it's purely on your advice when they first come to you.
Okay.
Like the rest of it will be, in my opinion, the rest is advocacy. You talk about, well, of course I have a claim, and you're lucky we're not suing you for more. You like all that sort of
But in the exam,
on that. You don't do that, no.
Okay.
What we're looking at only is objectively assessing the law. That's it. So that's why I said, don't think of this as you being in court and advocacy. This is purely about your assessment. What can you do with these facts and the law that you know? Edward?
Yes, sir. We have a question from the client. For example, like a situation, to decide if there's like a novel duty of care.
Yeah.
Okay, we know that we need to establish approximately possibility, and the last one, like public reason. Okay, how to answer the third test, like.
For the public policy?
Public policy, how can I answer my client, because it's like, see, it's entirely up to the court to answer that question.
Yeah, but you get a sense, your training is supposed to give you a sense of what would be some of the considerations.
Okay, so there's no like specific test to apply it.
For the public policy?
Yeah.
No.
But burden is on the defendant, right? Not the plaintiff.
No, the plaintiff.
So
The burden of proof is on the plaintiff. The defendant, because of the adverse inference, will always put forward an argument. Otherwise, it's as if you're saying, yeah, I agree.
did you say in an exam situation we don't argue both sides?
No, I did not.
So what did you say?
I said the opposite.
That
You
is
do
argue both sides.
You have to take money from both of them. That's the point. You don't know
So
what
the reason why I said that was when a client first comes to you and says, do I have a claim? You have to assess, do they have a claim? And you're going to look at the pros and cons of the claim. That necessitates looking at what what would be in favor of your client, what would be against your client. And that's how you provide your advice. So next week, we'll pick up with psychiatric damage and move into standard of care. And probably we could get through standard of care, causation, remoteness next week. Have a good weekend. So we meet on Monday and Wednesday next week in this room. You can come on Tuesday. Oh, yeah.